Adrian N. Breitfelder, City Clerk, you are hereby directed to call a special session of the City Council to be held on Monday, September 30th, 2024, at 6:30 p.m. in the historic Federal Building for the purpose of conducting a work session on the Central Avenue and White Street corridor traffic study.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to a special session of the Dubuque City Council for September 30th, 2024. As a reminder to viewers and listeners, due to the nature of tonight's meeting topic, public input is not accepted. However, you may contact the City Council directly from the city's webpage at www.cityofdubuque.org/council contacts. Attendance for the session is as follows. Mayor Kavanaugh.
Here.
Council members Farber.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
Resnick. I'll try one more time. Resnick.
Here.
Thank you. Roussel.
Here.
Sprank.
Here.
Wethel.
Here.
City Manager Van Milligan.
Here.
And City Attorney Brumwell.
Here.
Thank you. Our work session topic is the Central Avenue and White Street corridor traffic study. I will turn it over to Traffic Engineer Justine Hall.
Good evening, City Mayor and City Council persons. I really appreciate the fact that you are here tonight, talking about Central Avenue and White Street corridor traffic study. We will be presenting on some things for some alternatives for this project. This is new information that has yet to see public eye or seeing our stakeholders and our project management teams and things. We just want to have a discussion about those things. So I will introduce Andrew Dresner as our Senior Urban Planner and Senior Traffic Engineer Jennifer McCoy with Bolton and Mink. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for having us here today. We'll be presenting you some material. The main purpose here today, though, is to allow you an opportunity to ask us questions. Okay, so we'll try to get through our material and then open it up for you all. Let's see here. Okay, so our simple agenda here is to go through where we are in the study, to describe to you what we've learned so far. We'll be presenting some alternatives as well as the evaluation of those alternatives, and then giving you time to ask questions. The material that you received last week is somewhat dense. This is complicated, hard stuff, so we'll keep it as simple as we can, but we'll welcome the questions because we suspect there will be several. It's useful also, I think, to just take a quick look at the vision statement up here. Central Avenue and White Streets will become a valued and vibrant place in downtown Dubuque, a place for businesses to thrive, people to live, and for the unique identity and history of the city to shine. That's sort of our premise upon which we're working. Just quick reminder in terms of where it is we are studying Central and White through downtown from 22nd all the way down to the highway to about 3rd and 4th Street. That's about a mile long. Okay, so the physical context about a mile long, two roadways. There is, of course, an historical context here, and that is that Central and White used to be a state highway, but through jurisdictional changes over the last decade, a series of them over the last decade, Central and White are now a local street. So in sort of the overall history or arc of this, this is about reclaiming Central and White for their local purposes. Okay. In terms of the project, we're 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through. We're in the refine period. This is our work session with you. We anticipate being back in front of you in, I believe it is mid-November, with a recommended road layout. Okay. So as I mentioned, this is about Central and White going through downtown. We talk about it as a corridor study. And it is a corridor study, but it's a very delicate one in that it goes through your downtown, which is a series of different districts. And you'll see as we go forward, we'll describe the north-south cut through downtown a series of different ways. But essentially, it has a southern portion, which is in between the Millwork District and downtown. It's got a central portion around which there are several civic buildings and schools. And it's got a northern portion, which goes through a a mixed-use urban neighborhood, okay? So, and that's really important because as two roadways, it operates, yes, it operates as a north-south roadway, but as many people are crossing the street and are using the street as are traveling along it. So it's with those sort of balanced uses that this project has to navigate. So we really think of this not just as two roads, but we think of them as 22 or thereabout blocks through your downtown, and we think of it as a zipper, a place that can pull together the different districts of downtown. And that's how we are hoping to help design this place. A couple assumptions that are built into this that are really important because they, in some ways, enable this project to happen. So we're assuming that the 14th Street Bridge will go forward. We know I think it's mostly funded now. The 14th Street Bridge will connect over the tracks and giving freight a more direct, a more reliable route to get to the regional highways, okay? We also are assuming that the Pine Street connection, which is the other pink arrow on this map, will be completed, and that will enable industrial uses to access the highway more directly as well. And what those two improvements do essentially is they loosen up traffic everywhere from 14th south. So those are the dotted lines there. And that really enables residents and businesses in the city to reclaim those streets a little bit more because freight traffic will be given a more reliable, a more stable, and a more secure way to get onto the big highways, which is really where they want to go. And then the third assumption we're building into this is that 18th Street Plaza will happen. And that is the short block between Central and White on 18th Street that is approved in the Central Avenue Streetscape Plan. So that's all modeled into it. So those are three of the major assumptions that are in all of the alternatives. I'll turn it over to Jen.
Thank you, Andrew. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the outreach that we've done since we were last here at Council at the beginning of July. So we did go ahead and attend some in-person events at the Farmers Market and National Night Out, and we also launched a survey. So we were able to engage about 115 people during those in-person events, but the public survey is really where we saw a lot of people kind of weigh in. And the questions that we asked them are, what amenities do you want to see on Central and White? What's important to you? Is it important to have landscaping, wide sidewalks, bike lanes, and what is what's most important? So I think one piece I wanted to note here is that we did have about over 800 submissions to the public survey, which was great. We did ask people if they lived on the corridor or owned a business on the corridor. However, it wasn't mandatory for you to fill that in. So when we do say that we had 43 corridor residents and 32 corridor businesses or property owners, that is of those that told us that they lived on the corridor, they had a business or a property owner. I think one thing that's interesting is about 78% of those residents and business owners were north of 13th Street and 22% south of 13th Street. So just kind of something to keep in mind as we go through this data. So here's some of the things we've learned so far about Central. So again, we asked people, what's most important to you? If it came down to wider sidewalks, maximized parking, or bike amenities, what is most important? The corridor residents prefer wider sidewalks on Central, from what we found. Corridor businesses prefer maximized parking. Non-corridor respondents also wanted maximized parking. When we look at one-way versus two-way traffic, what do you prefer? Corridor residents preferred one-way on Central. Corridor businesses preferred two-way on Central. Non-corridor respondents wanted one-way. When we asked the same questions about White Street, it actually, the responses changed a bit. The corridor residents said they actually preferred bike amenities on White versus a wider sidewalk. The corridor businesses, again, preferred maximized parking on White. The non-corridor respondents also wanted maximized parking on White. One thing I wanted to note is that 7 respondents had said that a bike facility They really wanted a bike facility, but it could be on a parallel street. But they did desire some type of a commitment to something installed soon. So they thought if it weren't to go on White, it could go on another parallel street. However, they didn't want to wait, another 5-10 years for that connection to be made. And then when we asked them about for White Street, one-way versus two-way, the residents preferred one-way on White. The businesses, again, preferred two-way on White, and the non-corridor respondents wanted one-way. So trying to take all of this information together, and how does this factor into the alternatives that we were going to bring forth to study? And we tried to put that all together, and it resulted in the following 4 alternatives. Kind of titled them a bit, but essentially we have a multimodal focused alternative which keeps the configuration in one-way streets. Then we have the getting to and sticking around, which is the two-way streets. We have the slow flow, which is also a one-way alternative. And then we have the different roads, different roles, which is a combination of one-way and two-way. So I'll get into those details in just a little bit. First, I wanted to set the stage of, what do we have today as we're talking about cross sections and lanes and things like that. What do we have today? So you see Central and White today up here. So the travel lanes vary between 12 foot to 14 foot. They're wider on Central than they are on White. Parking varies between a 6-foot lane and an 8-foot lane, and the sidewalks vary between a 5-foot and a 10-foot. And some have buffers and some do not. As a whole, there's just kind of limited grass and vegetation on these corridors today. I was just going to touch on this, just so all these cross sections that you see are rooted in design criteria that comes out of SUDAS. So now that this road is a city street and no longer an Iowa DOT street, it's the state urban design specifications that apply to these roads. And so I think one piece that kind of stood out to me is that, SUDAS recommends a 10-foot travel lane in urban areas, but they clarify that roads with heavy trucks or buses should use 11-foot lanes. So that's why these alternatives have 11-foot lanes, because of the amount of trucks and buses we have on Central and White. So I won't bore you with all the other numbers on this table, but they're there for reference if you'd like them. So let's dig in a little bit into the alternatives. So the first is the multimodal focused alternative. In this alternative, both streets remain one-way pairs. The lane configuration, as far as 2 lanes in each direction, is like it is today. However, parking is removed on one side of Central and one side of White. What this allows for is that wide sidewalk landscaping and outdoor dining to be placed on Central, and a 2-way cycle track to be placed on White Street. You may recall when we were here before, we talked about if a bike facility were to be placed on one of these corridors, because of the amount of trucks, that bike facility would need to be separated from the traffic. And so what we are proposing is a 2-way cycle track. So what that is the cycle track, the bike facility is actually the same level as the sidewalk. So it actually provides a nice buffer from moving traffic, and also kind of provides that wider, the sidewalk and cycle track area. So I'll show you a picture here. So you can, that doesn't show it. Oh, here we go. Okay, so here on Central, you can see that we have the wide sidewalks on both sides. One side of parking is removed. You can see we have room for outdoor dining, perhaps public art, and a grass buffer between that activity and moving traffic. On White Street, we have there's the cycle track, as I mentioned, adjacent to a sidewalk, and then a buffer between that cycle track and the moving traffic. And you do still have an opportunity for a 10-foot sidewalk on White as well. So this is kind of what that cycle track would lay out. It's a little bit different. There's room for trees and tree wells in this alternative as well. So moving on to getting to and sticking around. So this is the 2-way alternative. So Central and White are changed to 2-way streets, 1 lane in each direction from 4th all the way to 22nd Street. Parking is maximized and present on both sides of the roadway in this alternative, except at a few locations. We found that left turn lanes are needed at all signalized intersections. What was happening with the one lane in each direction. If you get one person to make a left turn at a signal, they back that traffic up for blocks. And so you will need a short left turn lane at those intersections. So at the intersections, at all signalized intersections, a short left turn lane is needed. With the exception of the blocks between 8th and 12th, because there's so many signals and that turn lanes need to be longer, it becomes more a 3-lane section. That's that section where you'd have one lane in each direction with a center two-way left turn lane. It can fit, but it does remove parking on one side. So it looks a little bit different between 8th and 12th. So just kind of wanted to show that. So here's what some of those cross sections could look like. So the one on Central looks very much like what you saw through the Central Avenue streetscape plan, with parking on both sides and one lane in each direction. You do get wider sidewalks and some trees and tree wells. On White, it looks very similar as well. I just kind of showed a sample here of a bumped out cross section. So if you were to stick with this type of cross-section, you could have the opportunity where we could pull parking back in a few areas, have a bump out, kind of mid-block. Maybe you could put outdoor dining on that bump out. You could put bike racks. You could have a transit shelter, public art, so you're not taking parking off both sides of the road, but at key locations, you would be maybe taking parking off in order to have those extra amenity areas with this alternative. The next is slow flow. So Central and White remain one-way pairs with 2 lanes in each direction with parking on both sides. However, from 9th to 4th, the travel lanes change to 1 and parking is removed on one side. This allows maximum amenities to be placed on Central and White. This is also kind of what we found is the traffic volumes are lower in this area between 4th and White, so it allows us to maybe reduce to 1 lane in order to maximize those amenities. That's also that key area, as Andrew talked about, where you're trying to maybe connect from the Millwork District to Main Street, and Central and White can be that kind of that zipper, right? So they can kind of be that bridge, and this would be a much easier cross section to cross than 2 lanes. So I'm just showing an example here of what White could look like. So White, north of 9th, would have, again, much like it looks today, 2 lanes northbound with parking on both sides, but south of 9th, this could be a wide sidewalk with parking and 1 lane. This wide sidewalk area could also be a cycle track, it could be outdoor dining, it could be more buffer area, it could be many things. Room for transit shelters, whatever that space could be programmed, but it really becomes a very nice amenity zone for those trying to walk along this corridor and cross it. The last one is different roads and different roles. So we tried to take a look, obviously, if you look at the survey data, maybe in some cases people wanted 1-way, in other cases people wanted 2-way, but the 2-way obviously seem to be more favorable potentially in the area north of 13th. As Andrew talked about, the land use is different north of 13th than it is south of 13th, So the idea with this one is, what if we did a 2-way street north of 13th, so you could have that circulation, you could have that 1 lane in each direction, you could have to help like those street front commercial and help the residents in that area circulation. But south of 13th, where the land use changes, it would go back to the traditional, the 1-way pair it is today. So this is what it would look like on Central. So Central north of 13th would have 1 lane in each direction with parking. But south of 13th, it would look similar to what it does today with 2 lanes northbound and parking on both sides. And I did want to pause. So with, and Andrew will get into this a little bit later, but with that cycle track I showed earlier, that could be a piece of any of these alternatives. What we're showing you today is how it could generally lay out. However, parking would have to be removed on one side. There's just no way to fit that. So if council did decide, or the public, what we're hearing is like, absolutely, we want that bike facility, it can fit with any of these. It's just a trade-off of parking. So it's just something to keep in mind. So Andrew will cover that a little bit later. I will go ahead and pass it over to him.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, so I'm going to Jennifer presented to you the 4 basic alternatives, and I'm going to go through a little bit of the evaluation matrix. Our evaluation was based on these 4 guiding principles: safety, economic development, equity, and connectivity. So we evaluated all 4 based on these. And that's important because this is a place that if it does not achieve economic development, if it does not achieve equity for people using it, it will remain a traditional highway corridor. So the evaluation matrix that you received last week is also up on the screen. So to the left, or the rows I should say, are the different alternatives. So do nothing is keeping it exactly as it is now, and the 4 starting at multimodal are what Jennifer just laid out. And up top, you can see the 4 criteria and how we start to evaluate it. I don't want to go through all of this, but I do want to point out just a couple of items. The basic legend here is red for having a negative effect on what is out there today. Yellow is neutral, and then green is a positive effect. We didn't get into how positive, we just want to keep it, or how negative for that matter. We just want to keep it relatively simple as a discussion point and an opportunity for you to ask questions about any of these. A couple things just to point out. First of all, under safety, we have 2 columns. We have conflict points and predictive crashes. And someone might say, well, how can you have a high number of conflict points in a red box, such as 976, but very few crashes, only 40? Doesn't that seem sort of counterintuitive? Well, the reason for that is that in a corridor like this, in which speeds are relatively slow, when you have conflict points, people are careful. They're more careful than when you don't have conflict points, because people are aware of what is going around them. So the crashes and in a sense the safety of the place is actually quite high. So I just want to point that one thing out, because that is something that seems contradictory. Under equity, I want to point out under bicycles, Jennifer mentioned this, I want to just mention it again. On any one of these alternatives, we can add a cycle track, okay, on any one of them. However, it will come at the cost of something. It'll come at the cost of either parking, narrower sidewalks, or a travel lane. Okay, we have a limited right-of-way. And that's both our blessing and our curse, frankly, in an old city. So that's just an important point to pull out. And then one other point in terms of the through travel times. So through travel times is the distance it takes to get all the way from A to B along the full length, from 3rd Street all the way up to 22nd or thereabouts. So as through travel time increases, that is an impact primarily on people who are traveling all the way from 3rd Street to 22nd Street. People who live on the corridor, do business on the corridor, their customers, and if they're residents, they're generally not going the full distance. They're stopping somewhere along the way. So that's just an important point to make. It's not just, and it sort of exemplifies the way in which a corridor is used for different people, different ways. Okay, I would suspect that you'll have more questions about this matrix. It's pretty dense, so I want to move on. Okay. So overall, this is the 4 scenarios on a single page. So here's a couple of the high-level things that we have found. All of the configurations, with the exception of the slow and flow at the year 2050 in rush hour, essentially have a minor through delay, 1.5 minutes or thereabouts in travel time. Okay. So in other words, with the exception of 2050 rush hour, based on growth of the city, travel times does not change much. That's really important. We modeled 2050 with regional growth because that's what we're supposed to do. Whether that growth happens, whether it happens the way in which it's predicted to happen, is a different situation altogether. We can't completely predict the future, but we want to measure, we want to give you that data. A few other items here. Well, the fourth bullet is what I mentioned before, that you can fit the amenities for bikes, but it would come at the cost of either a travel lane, parking, or pedestrian sidewalk, or the width of the pedestrian sidewalk. Two-way streets require those left turn lanes. That's really important to clear the intersection so traffic can keep moving and not get too gummed up. And then we also we know we haven't talked much about it, but this is a freight corridor, and trucks need to be accommodated. So geometric geometric accommodations have to be made at certain intersections. That's really important, and that can be done. And that's you have them out here today, right now, with certain intersections that have the painted X boxes that you're not supposed to go into, so trucks can curve wide. So that would be taken into consideration at the important intersections in all the scenarios. Another important finding goes back to the idea of the side streets. So we described this as central and white, but it also described it as 22 blocks. And each block's got 4 sides, so 2 of the sides are the side streets. The side streets can play an important role in the overall development of this area and the management of transportation. What we've suggested is that the side streets, you can see in these illustrations here, can add, if they can provide the need of additional parking if that's needed. They can provide the need as plaza space if that's desired. They can provide the need for green space if that is desired. All of that can happen without any impact on really significant impact on the transportation aspects. So as we've said, how you have a limited right-of-way, there's always a compromise. Side streets can kind of come into the game as relieving some of the pressure of some of the things that might be lost or might not be able to be accommodated within the central and white right-of-way. Okay, so when we put this all together, it's important to recognize that these 2 streets are part of this larger transportation system around the entire city, the state system, the county system, et cetera. And this is about reclaiming central and white primarily for their local benefits. Connections to and across the corridor are just as important as along them. Most users, frankly, aren't traveling the full length. They're going to a destination, or they're just crossing the corridor. We have constrained right-of-ways. We've talked about that, and that is both a blessing and a curse. The side streets are very important. The plans that you have for 14th Street and Pine Street are really important because those loosen up the need for freight on the lower section of both of these streets, which allow them to be reclaimed a little bit more. A north-south bike facility is really important. That's just an important thing for the city to have. We've described how it can happen on Central or White. It could also be on a side street, but there's certainly a desire, if it is on a side street, for there to be a real commitment to that. And then finally, all of the configurations that we've shown here will not impact travel time significantly. So those are sort of a series of the higher order findings. Next steps, Jennifer?
So we'll be engaging our stakeholder groups and our focus groups tomorrow. And that's in preparation of making sure council has this information, all of our stakeholders and focus groups have this information before we go to the public for an open house on October 17th. And the idea would be to gather the stakeholder and focus group engagement, which you may recall is we have a resident focus group, a business and freight focus group. We have obviously our PMT, which is all the city departments. Then we have a PAT, which has a project advisory team, which has like your Imagine Dubuque, your Dubuque Forward, all of those types of groups as well. And so gathering all that information plus having an open house on October 17th. And the plan is to also launch a survey. We got such great engagement through our previous survey that we want to just have an opportunity for people to weigh in again that way again. And then the plan would be to come back at your November 18th council meeting and actually have a vote on the preferred alternative. We would bring all that feedback back to you along with, we're hoping, an alternative that rises to the top. If not, there might be a couple that you'll have to decide upon. But And then the plan would be to go back and refine that alternative, kind of lay everything out to the point that we can get a cost estimate. So we can put up a phasing and implementation plan that could be discussed through the budget process that's coming up in 2025. So with a final, public hearing and acceptance of the plan in January. So it was a little bit of our next steps. With that, we'll go ahead and open it up to any discussion or questions. Thank you.
Okay. Well, Andrew and Jennifer, thank you very much. Good night, everyone. It's been fun. All right, lights are back on, so here we go. So this is very, very helpful. I know we've all been looking forward to this discussion, so thank you very much for the work that you've done. I'm looking forward to hearing what folks have to say. I'm really looking forward to hearing what the public has to say with all the feedback that's going to come to us before November 18th, so that's wonderful. I will open it up for any questions, and Mr. Resnick, I haven't forgotten about you. So we'll come to you too. Whoever wants to go first. Yeah, Ms. Rousseau.
Thank you. The first thing I'd like to look at is the safety section. I'm still a little confused at how to reconcile the fact that options, the getting to and the different roads have higher conflict points. And I understand that you said people are going to be careful, but they also have fewer predictive crashes. So and considerably less than what's currently happening. So should I be concerned about those conflict points and look more carefully at the predictive crashes, or how do I reconcile that?
Sure. So the number of conflict points is just based upon the number of ways that people can potentially, come into conflict or hit each other at an intersection, right? So if you have two two-way streets, there are more of those points than if you had two one-way streets, right? You just have more directions of travel. However, the research in urban corridors like this one has shown that two-way streets actually have less crashes per year than one-way streets because people are just driving slower, more awareness, different things like that. And so that is what the research has shown. So conflict points, yes, they're greater, but in an urban environment, when you make those streets two-way, that's what the research is showing, is that you actually have more crashes in a one-way scenario than you do in a two-way scenario.
Okay, thanks. I'll save my next ones for the second round of questions.
All right, sounds good.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, Ms. Farber.
So following up on that conversation about the one-way versus two-way, I'm very curious, and I look forward to the conversation with the freight and the teams down, or the businesses down in the corridor, because it's so unusual that you have residential, commercial, and a truck fleet on the same pathway. And so the question I would have is to receive the input from the freight companies, because they are also concerned about crashes. And if you could explain a little bit, when people try to pass the trucks, what the difference might be from two-way versus one-way on their benefit.
So we, as I mentioned, we have a kind of freight focus group, and so in conversations with them before, just in general, we have shown them some ideas about cross sections before we kind of narrowed down to these more specific ones, and talked about one-way versus two-way, and they shared with us that two lanes is less concerning. 2 lanes in one direction is less concerning than 1 lane in each direction. And their thought was, if they're going slow and someone tries to pass them, they're going in the same direction. But if they're going slow and someone tries to pass them in a two-way street, they're going head to head with that oncoming traffic. So that was their concern, that 2 lanes would allow for passing and things like that. And then also the intersections. I know Andrew talked about that. We've really worked with the freight community to really understand their key intersections that we need to, protect, right, for the freight, for the turns, and make sure we're accommodating them. And obviously that'll change a little bit with the 14th Street overpass. Today, 16th Street might be one. In the future, it might not be. It might be more 14th Street. But we're not showing you those details today to that detail, but that would be something taken into account. We recognize how important those turns are to the freight community.
And then would you be adding that on the safety box as well? If you were looking at the evaluation matrix, would it go into that section? Because you've also got the potential for the connection to the 14th Street overpass, to the arterial, to some of the other interconnecting streets that you had talked about. So I'm just curious as to how that would come into play for safety.
Oh, for the, I feel like we talked about that internally. We felt like it still fit more in the connectivity piece rather than the safety piece. And yes, obviously they have different components. We felt connectivity is really where that fit the best. So.
Yeah, so I think it'll be interesting to hear the freight companies give you feedback on those potential other on and off ramps and other flow of traffic as well. So
Yes.
thank you very much.
Welcome.
Ms. Wethel.
Maybe city staff could remind me, when is the estimated completion for the 4th Street overpass as part of the RAISE grant? I don't remember the date of completion estimate.
The completion of the 14th Street Railroad at overpass has not been established yet. We still have to work through with the federal government. What are their requirements going to be for this pre-studies that we have to complete? I think the longest would be, if I remember correctly, would be 9 years. The shortest, I don't have a date for you yet.
Okay, thanks. Well, as it relates to the slow and flow, I am really hopeful we can move on Central and White before 9 years. But we can't do a slow and flow if we don't have that available for our freight. We'll have a number of years of congestion if we don't have that. I mean, in my eyes, maybe I'm wrong here. If you have, thoughts on it, I'd be really interested to know, just simply because if we go to a slow and flow and yet we still have the same amount of freight because the 14th Street overpass isn't completed, we're kind of putting ourselves in a difficult situation.
So I can say from the information we got from the MPO and that future year model that things really didn't start to break down till 2050 PM peak, like Andrew talked about. So 9 years from now would be what, 2035. So there is some time in there before you're going to reach those congested levels. So today, if you look at slow and flow today, it matches just what all of these other, it'd be yellow, just like all of the others. So it does work today. It's just as you reach that kind of peak capacity with growth, which is 20 to 25 years out, that is when that pinch point could occur in the PM peak. The AM peak seems to be working fine because people are traveling, it's more spread out, but that PM peak period. So I do feel from what we're seeing from the MPO and the projections from their transportation model that there is some time in there.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
Real quick, Ms. Wethel, can you tell us what those acronyms mean again? PNP, ANP.
Sorry. PM, so it's the evening peak. So the evening peak versus the morning peak. So that would be like your rush hour.
Oh, you said AM peak and PM peak.
Peak, yes.
Gotcha. Okay, I hear you now. Thank you.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, go ahead,
Okay.
please.
And I'm sorry, you had mentioned it, I believe, early on when you started, and I would just like to know how many owners were north of 13th versus south that responded? What was the breakdown of that?
It was 78 north of 13, 78% and 22% of the total, not of the total, but of just those that told us where they lived or where they owned a business.
Great, okay. And then you had mentioned the additional parking that we could get on our side streets if we removed parking from Central and White. Do you have an estimate of how many spots that actually is? Because we already have a lot of parking on side streets. I don't know how we can, in some areas, squeeze more parking in. I'm really curious about that.
Do you want to talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number. To maximize it, you're right, you already do have a lot. You basically generally have parallel on both sides. You could do things like switching road possibly to one way and do diagonal parking, possibly. It'll pick up a couple spaces, but you're right in that it won't pick up a lot. And of course, the more spaces, you're basically saying that side street will be close to a parking, I mean, it'll effectively act like a parking lot. So it can pick up a couple, but not a tremendous amount.
Okay, thanks.
I wanted to add some.
Oh, sure.
So I want to add something on about parking. So we will be doing a parking analysis with each of these alternatives to say, like, what is that loss of parking? But I think what's important to look at when it comes to, like we'll say, removal of parking, let's just throw a number out there. It's 100 spaces. That is not, I'm just throwing this out for just illustrative purposes. But if that parking is only 30% occupied, it's really a loss of 30 used spaces, even though there's 100 that are removed, only 30 used. So that's really the number we should be focusing on, is kind of how it's utilized today, not just the sheer number that's potentially being removed. So, and I think another piece of that too is what's happening off the street, right? The parking lots, the parking ramps, those types of things, who all just play an important piece in providing parking for this area. So we'll be coming back with those details, and we will have all those details too at the open house, so we can answer those questions more specifically for the public, the business owners in place as well. So.
Okay, great. As you mentioned that, does that information you're planning to bring back include an occupancy study of the current parking that would be removed? You know what I mean? So like if we are talking about removing specific spaces, what is the occupancy on average of those spaces? Because if 8 hours a day, they're 80% occupied versus 40% occupied, that's a huge piece of taking out parking.
Right, yes, we have that, the utilization information, and that'll all be factored into those calculations.
Okay.
So we'll be able to say, here's the number of spaces, but here's the number of kind of utilized spaces. So you'll be able to know, like, how many are actually being used versus, you know, how many are actually going to be, could be removed. So,
Perfect, wonderful. And I think I'm down to one, sorry. Let me go back, I lost my spot. I remember speaking just casually about the cost of converting a one-way to a two-way. But if I recall, we're talking millions. I mean, we're not talking about small amounts of money here. This would be a major investment for our residents to say, if we want a two-way, it's going to cost you millions of dollars. I want to make sure that we have that as part of our, if that is true or not true, to have that as part of this conversation, because I don't want any surprises if indeed people say, we want a two-way. Well, did you know?
right. So I think depending on the alternative, right? So the one-way itself obviously has more cost than a two-way. If we're just looking at, we'll just start with just the travel lanes, right? Because you have some striping, and then you have to, where your traffic signals are, you now have to add mast arms and lights overhead to handle that additional way of traffic flow. But even the one-way alternatives, if we're talking about moving curbs to get wider sidewalk and all this, that's really where more of your expense comes in. So you have that expense in either the one-way or the two-way alternatives is where more of that expense comes in. It's more of that, that's where the more expensive piece, when we start moving curbs and filling in with decorative pavers and landscaping and all of those things, that's usually where more of that streetscape cost can get those higher costs. So if all of that were equal, you know, you have the exact same thing happening, I guess, behind the curb, the two-way alternative would be slightly higher than the one-way alternative because you have the additional striping and signal cost. But really, it's more of that, what's happening behind the curb, which all of these have some type of, which you have to move curbs to get better sidewalks than you have today, right? So that's kind of in any of these alternatives. But yeah, when you start moving curbs, yeah, the cost goes up for that.
And I'm sorry, I do have one more. The multimodal focused study, so the cycle track, just to review for everybody at home who might not have gone through the plans, the multimodal focus track is the only one with cycle track. And that is a two-way cycle track on White. There is no cycle track on Central. Did you guys look at, with the multimodal plan, keeping the same amount of parking on Central and converting that cycle lane on White just as you have written in the multimodal plan? Was that ever a discussion?
We didn't, because we had heard from the feedback that people like the idea of a wider sidewalk on White and wider sidewalk on Central, cycle track on White. But yes, that could be an option. I think when we think about these alternatives, this could be where we start, but it could be, well, I like this from this and this from that, so they can be changed. Or if council or the public, like, we absolutely, parking is so important on Central. Yes, it just means you're going to have a less wide sidewalk. You're going to maybe lose those opportunities for outdoor dining, or maybe you'd have nodes of it where you put a bump out and have some of those. So yes, that can definitely be, that may be the outcome of this as well. So
Thank you.
Mr. Sprague?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I know what the SCADAS stuff is, but can you kind of explain that a little bit more to folks? Like, those are the rules that we have to apply by when we want to design something like this? Like, for example, SUDES, about how the streets have to be certain widths now, because that was in a slide that you kind of mentioned. So I just want to make sure that that is the rules that we have to apply by. So.
yes, so SUDES is adopted by the city as your standard kind of design and specifications. And so, yes, so SUDES is what is the statewide, so Iowa statewide urban design standards. And so, and now those are guidelines. So, but that is really the idea behind SUDES, is to get consistency across the state and urban areas, which is why we look at that as our reference for design.
It just gives us an idea why we're going to theoretically make these streets certain widths and such. So it literally gives us, when you have so much feet to figure out like what we can do in. So that's why I just want to make sure that folks were aware of that. So the other thing in your projections for that 2050 projections, so we're looking at revamping Central. We're also investing in Central heavily. People are rebuilding or rehabbing buildings, so we're going to have more rental units. Are those numbers projected in there as well?
Can I answer that question, or I can? Okay. Yes, so those are. So there's, that is all part of that metropolitan transportation model. It has all of that future growth projected, not just the growth areas, but also that kind of redevelopment or intensification or whatever that is included as well. So
at this point, that model and those projections do still say that we have enough parking depending on which direction that we go, or we're going to lose some parking essentially.
So the model doesn't take into account parking. It's purely transport vehicles and vehicle projections. So we could apply that similar growth rate to vehicles on the road to the parking today to determine, okay, if we grew the parking by the same, do we have enough parking? And yeah, we could definitely bring back that as kind of that testing exercise, because I know that has come up. Okay, well, you look at today's utilization, but what if it grows with all these things going on? What is that? But it's also 25 years from now. How are people going to be traveling, and what are they going to be doing, and how are they going to be working, and all the things, there's a lot of unknowns that go into it. So we rely on that transportation model to try and capture all of that. So.
Because it's an assumption. We're assuming that this is going to happen. Like, theoretically, a gentleman, he's redoing a building on the corner of 17th and Central. I think he's going to put in 8 units that weren't there before. So now all of a sudden everyone's assuming that there's going to be 8 to 10 to 12 cars there. Well, we've also learned that a lot of folks, because what were the statistics again?
So
for how many walk versus?
51% auto ownership in this area. So if it's an 8 unit, it's likely 4 cars, right? So.
And then the last thing about that cycle track idea in the multimodal focus, I like it. It's really nice. The way that it's kind of shown in one of your slides, theoretically, if we needed that, could that be turned into parallel parking again? Or does that have to be as wide as that is? Or is that just common to have it?
The cycle track has to be 10 feet for two-way traffic.
Okay. That was all I had for now. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
So I checked with engineering on that earlier question about when do we anticipate the 14th Street Railroad overpass being completed? And their response was 2030.
Okay, thank you. And just real quick on that, I mean, you mentioned that we're still working through with the federal government and the requirements and those types of things. So even with that considered, 2030 is still the answer, is what they're saying.
It's only an estimate at this point.
Estimate,
but-
sure.
But certainly, as we learn more about what level of environmental study they'll require, those kinds of things, it could move up. I don't know if this is the worst case, so I don't know if it could move back, but
Okay. All right. Thanks, Mike. And Jennifer, real quick before I go on to more questions, if our cars aren't flying in 25 years, I'm going to be really disappointed. Mr. Jones, you want to go, or you should?
I don't think you can look forward to them flying
You can fight about that.
anytime soon. We've got, airspace is pretty busy a lot of places already. Appreciate all the work in explaining that to move one thing, other things have to get out of the way. And that's real apparent on the Central Avenue corridor, many corridors in the city this old. There's just X amount of space between the guy on the left side of the street's front stoop and the guy on the right side of the street's front stoop. And what you put in between it requires a lot of thought and conversation. So I appreciate the fact that you're going back to an open house and going back to more public input. I appreciate the fact we got some friends here that have stakes in this, and we want to hear from you as this process moves along, and they need to hear from you. And if they hear from you before we hear from you, it'll be a little gentler path. But it's really important that people who this impacts are paying attention to it, because it's going to change lives. It's going to change how things happen out there. And one of the council's biggest concerns of this corridor is the speed of traffic and the dangers and sounds and noises that come with that. And we talked about, do we lower the speed limit? Usually when that happens, the only thing that changes is the number on the sign for a long time, unless you've got the ability to enforce it. And it's almost impossible on a busy street with parking on both sides to stage a patrol car to affect the traffic stop, find a safe place for the violator to pull over, get everybody back in the stream of traffic. And when you do, it's a 20-minute operation. You've issued one ticket, slowed down one person. So it's not pretty effective for that person for about 3 weeks till they forget about it. So I'm going to be looking for traffic calming features that tend to get people to look around a little bit more and think that they're in a neighborhood instead of thinking that they're on a highway. And just about all of these kind of achieve that. So I don't want to say that you missed it, because you certainly didn't. But that's important to the people that live in those streets, where they step out their front stoop and they've got a few feet of sidewalk and a parking row, and 40-mile-an-hour traffic is their reality right now. So I really appreciate, though, the way you've laid out the puzzle pieces, that all the if-thens, if this, then something, then there's a that. And that's, I guess, what we all have to keep in mind, is if we make something better, some of the things are going to get a little bit worse. And better is in the eye of the beholder, so we need to talk to a lot of beholders to get this right, because we don't want to invest this kind of money and discover that we didn't quite nail it. So thank you.
Mr. Resnick.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Yes, thank you for your presentation. I really found the evaluation matrix very helpful. And, I substituted a numeric value for the colors, red, yellow, and green. And what it comes up with is that it strongly recommends the multimodal focus. I mean, the do nothing group is a -2, multimodal scores a 6, getting to is a 1, slow and flow is a 0, and asymmetry is a 1. I mean, it's very clear that the multimodal modal receives the recommendation of this matrix. And you can argue with the matrix or not, but I think it's very clear what's going on. My question to you is, do you think we should narrow the focus before any more citizen input? There's so many moving parts with all these different modes. It's really hard to know what to concentrate on. But this is a question for the council as well as yourselves. Do you think that we ought to focus on the multimodal format?
I'm going to let you go first on this one, if you have any thoughts on it. I think that's kind of, I expect us to give maybe a little bit more feedback before you walk out the door today, so love to hear your thoughts first.
Mayor, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
I'd like to go first before them.
Sure.
So I had a pre-meeting with our consultants and reviewed all this information, which I thought was great information, and appreciated that. But I cautioned them on that they were not to ask the council for any decisions tonight. Because A, it's not a regular city council meeting where you make decisions. And B, this is the first time anybody's seen this, you and the public. And it, in my opinion, it was way too early to start making decisions. That doesn't mean you don't get to do whatever you want, but that's what I cautioned them on. I said, this is for you to present them information and facts, them to ask you questions. From those questions, you'll learn what more information and facts you need as this then gets exposed to the public before it does come back to them to start making decisions.
Well, that's a very thoughtful response, Mike. I appreciate that. Mr. Resnick, I'll let you respond then to what the city manager had to say there.
Well, as usual, he makes very good sense. And I can see that, well, I mean, as long as this, we all agree, I mean, no, we don't have to agree right now. I'm just going to say that the evaluation matrix strongly recommends by a factor of 3 times better than anything else, the multimodal. All right, now, so I'll just go past that to my next question. I noticed you have elevated bike lanes, and of course, for them to succeed, they need further connectivity. You know, you can't go up and down all the time necessarily throughout the area. Do you anticipate that to be a problem to have elevated bike lanes in this area alone, or is there more plans for elevated bike lanes?
So we wanted to we have been seeing how that could connect, right? And so what we're looking at is, you know, the cycle track would run. It'd start in the area. You already have the trail that goes to the port. I believe that's on 5th. So it would start in that area of 5th. It would continue up the west side. At 16th, there was a plan in the Dubuque County bike ped plan to have some type of a connection. And so we are looking at a on-the-street cycle track because the traffic changes there to get you over to the complete street and over into B branch. And then you would continue north to 19th. And at 19th, you would connect over, is it Elm? That's the complete street. That's the plan. I think it's Elm to go north, south. And so before you get up to the 21st, 22nd and all that very kind of busy activity, you would be over and up. And so there are some, it basically would get you over east at 16th and 19th, which is good because it's going to connect you more into even more of the neighborhood in that regard. So that's what we were looking at, is really connecting to those things that are either in place today or planned with like the 14th Street overpass and some of those other things to connect to that facility.
That's great that you've done so much consideration so far. Thank you very much. And one last question for me. I was unsure about whether, since I and many people anticipate the trucks will be mostly north because they utilize the new overpass when it goes into service. Does the multimodal accommodate the fact that that a lot of trucks are going to be using that overpass? And I anticipated a yes, but I was just unclear.
Yes, so we would again look at those intersections of 14th and 9th and 11th for those turns on and off of Central and White, and making sure we accommodate the cycle track through that intersection, but also making sure that we're accommodating those turns as well. So yeah, we're looking at the best kind of maybe striping and other configuration that we can make sure both of those modes can get through those intersections, you know, safely and do what they need to do to continue on.
Thank you very much. I know that it's too early probably for you to give us a recommendation, but the evaluation matrix kind of does that. And I appreciate all the hard work and thinking that went into this. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I have a number of questions, and then we'll see if we have any more that as we go through this. So my first one is kind of a big one in this whole equation. Why aren't we talking about cost at all? And I understand that there's a lot that goes into cost, but why is it not even a part of the conversation right now? It's just a general question.
So We decided to leave cost out to really look at these kind of guiding principles, right? And really to let that be the thing that rises to the top, to, again, going back to that vision that Andrew talked about at the beginning and really setting that stage. So that's why cost is not a piece that's shown. When we come back in the 18th, cost would be a piece, when we come back on the 18th, determining which alternative you move forward with. If there are two, we would be able to at least give some guidance, not complete details, because we won't have those details till we go kind of design that preferred alternative further, like we talked about. But
That's really helpful. I think one of the reasons I asked that question too is because as we go out into more public discussion, I think people need to know what we're talking about. Are we just talking about the cheapest alternative, or are we talking about what we want to see? And I think talking first about what we would like to see and what's really important to us seems to me to be the most important discussion to have right now, because we can always talk about what it's going to cost us later and figure out what parts of it we want to pay for and what parts we can break down and not necessarily have. Because you said there's a lot of interchangeability between these. For instance, we could take that bike lane and put it on quite a few of these in various different ways, or even just parts of it, for example.
Yes.
But I think it's important that we have a larger community discussion about what it is that's the most important to us. And I know cost is important. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not. It definitely is going to be a factor as we decide what to do, but I like the approach that you're taking to do that first. I just think it was a question I wanted to ask really bluntly because I noticed that we aren't talking about it at all. Okay, the multimodal, I have some specific questions based on some of these specific models that you have. The multimodal, will this slow traffic? You know, I was kind of fascinated by the fact that in the 2050 mark, we're just slowing down by 1.5 minutes or something like that for any one of the alternatives. It doesn't quite compute in my head easily because I'm thinking about how people drive there now, which is too fast, frankly. And that's one of the biggest complaints that I know I've heard, and a lot of us here, we're driving too fast, especially on parts of Central that are way too wide open. But I did notice we've got 14-foot lanes that are going to be 11 at the most in any of these models. Are all of these going to have sort of the traffic calming or traffic slowing features to them? Do you expect traffic to slow down based on this and the way people behave based on research?
Yes, narrower lanes will slow people down. Maybe 4 miles an hour, maybe 5 miles an hour. Not a tremendous amount, but 5 miles, going from 27 to 22 is a big deal. It's only 5 miles an hour, but it makes a big difference. So just reducing lane widths will do that. Speed is, it's a function of design. It's not a function of the sign, as we know.
That's a good one.
It's a function of the design, and we can design a street, and we should be designing streets for the desired speeds. So,
got it. Which we have the opportunity to do in this case.
Yes.
Because we're designing a new street. We're designing a new thoroughfare.
Yeah.
It's not just going to be
And
the
it's
same,
not-
unless
it's
we
a-
keep it the same.
It's a function of, not just a function of lane width. It's, I mean, not to get into it, but it's a function of horizontal design as well as vertical elements. It's sort of, it's all those pieces that go into the design.
Great. Okay. I think that's a very helpful point to make. So I'm going to move on then to the slow and flow. Why is it that we only have from 9th to 4th go one lane? What was the reason for that again? Can you remind me?
Because we can.
it's purely a traffic volume reason. So traffic, as picks, let's say you're going north on White, you're going to pick up more traffic at 9th, more traffic at 11th, more traffic at 14th. So it's just, we couldn't accommodate the flow north of there. As I mentioned, even on the two-way alternative, we need that third lane between 8th and 12th. It's just, we just have more traffic in that area, more turns, those types of things. So, but south of 9th, traffic drops off, and we have that opportunity to go down to one lane.
Gotcha. Similar question for the different roles and different roads alternative. The north of 13 is going to be, it's two-way all the way there, and then one-way south of 13? Okay. And is it a similar type of reason? Is it a volume issue that you're thinking of there? Or?
So we originally thought, well, maybe we'll go one way north of 13th and two way to the south, right? But our concern was if you are, say you're traveling north on White and you're one lane, there's one lane south, one lane north, and then you get to 13th and now you have two lanes, what are you going to do? You're going to speed up, right? It's going to feel wider. And so that was kind of our concern. So if we leave it as two lanes and then you have the ability to have the slower speeds and things like that. Now the one lane portion, even on that asymmetry one, those one-way roads will still have narrower lanes than they do today. They'll still have the landscaping, they'll still have the things, so we're still going to have that slowing effect. But, and it also, when talking to the school, they felt the one-ways adjacent to their, they've made that work, and they like the way that works with traffic flow in and out of the school as well. And so that was kind of the other reason into that, so.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Okay. This is another question, I don't know if you're able to answer this, but if we make any of these changes, any one of the four, what would the timeline be on each one? Would it be similar? I mean, let's just, we know we've got a timeline of essentially 6 years to get to the 14th Street overpass. If we were to say, let's just pretend that the public has a really clear idea what they want, the council adopts something, we move something forward, yet this year, early next year is what it kind of looks like on the timeline you have. Let's say we adopt something next year. What would the timeline be for actually making changes like that? As fast as we can budget it, essentially? Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it comes down to. Now it's a budget question, and then it's a source of funds question.
Yep.
So if they're all city funds, you'll go as fast as you can budget the money. If a federal grant is involved, well, then you come into environmental studies and all those kinds of things, and it slows it down. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about a 2030 completion, just like the overpass, if it's a major change.
Yep.
But I mean, that's just pure conjecture.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the earlier part of your answer is probably the really most important piece of it, is that it's going to be what we can pay for and how we can pay for it. Because when we decide on what we can do, we do have to figure out the path forward for making that happen. Yeah, and it'll be prioritizing by the council, but then also working with our federal partners and state partners to be able to get that done. So I think that's the end of my questions. I'll open it back up, but I have a couple of things just to say first. I think, as I think about this, we've kind of all mentioned this in different ways, but and you've covered a lot of it too, but I just more for the benefit of the public discussion here. There's a few things that are really, really important to me as I think about this, and one is safety. That's first and foremost. I think safety has to be top of mind for us. And that really does include speed in many ways, but it's not just speed. It's also just safety of how travelers are going to be moving in this corridor when we make these changes. And with that said, another thing that I think is really important, and I hope we can all get on this page as a community, we have to think about all of the travelers who are using this corridor. I think some of the argument that we've had so far has been, well, we need to make this more for people who aren't in vehicles, or we need to make this more for cars and not trucks, or we need to make it more for trucks because it's still kind of a highway. We really need to do all of it, is what we need to focus on here, and think about how we can do that in the best way possible. I don't think any one of those groups is going to think that this is perfect in the end, but I think we're all going to be able to use it. And that's what I hope we can land on, is something that we're all able to use, because there are a number of different travelers, and we've laid that out nicely here. I think Ms. Farber really specifically kind of talked about how the having freight involved is unique, but it is a part of what we have here. And we really can't, barring flying trucks or an overpass that just goes all the way over the city, we really can't get out of this predicament. We have a road that leads to the two main bridges out of town, and freight is north of the city and needs to get to that point. So the more we can help that happen safely in conjunction with these other things that we're doing, I hope that's the conversation we can really focus on. I'm glad you've talked about parking. I'm glad we're going to hear more about parking with actual numbers when you come back, because that is a big concern for business owners in particular, but then also, as Mr. Sprank pointed out, residents that are going to be moving into this area, which we fully expect based on the action that we're seeing down there right now with development and more commercial space. So I'm really happy with where this conversation is starting right now. I'm really glad to see we have some good information to go on, some good pictures to show us what this could really look like. I think that helps with us as we envision this. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from the public on this. So this is great so far. So other thoughts, Ms. Farber?
Yeah, just one more enthusiastic remark is about the, if you will, the connections that you talked about between the millwork and Main Street and between the commercial and the residential in that area. And that's really the heartbeat for us, I think, going forward, is how to get it blended and how to have what I call eye candy, just to have a really great connection that is not only pleasing to the eye, but pleasing to walk or to bike or to just be there at a cafe and things like that. So it's really the recreation, if you will, and just getting the downtown environment. The energy that it used to have, 40, 50 years ago was really a downtown focus for the city where a lot of people would live, and a lot of the commercial was actually in that downtown corridor. So that would be really interesting to hear when you do your next round of input, what that feedback might be from those that are doing the survey. And then I'm also really curious about what the residents, the commerce in particular, and also the freight companies think about that, because it is the road less traveled and unique in many respects for the freight companies. So thank you, and I just am very appreciative of the fact you had almost 1,000 people give you comments, and hopefully you'll have the same kind of response back. So thank you.
Mr. Sprankford.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At what point are we going to be talking to like our public works department? Are we going to need, if we go with certain options, are we going to have to buy like a special piece of equipment? Because, for the bike lanes, transportation, and of course our police and fire, when will we be talking with them? Or when will you be talking with them?
So we have a project management, a PMT, a project management team, and Public Works is a piece of that. And we have had specific conversations with EMS and police and the county sheriff as well already. That's where we kind of, I know EMS, again, they kind of prefer the 2 lanes to allow for passing. They obviously operate on a lot of two-way streets and do just fine. They also recognize the grid system in downtown allows them some flexibility to move around as well. But police was kind of, their whole thought is obviously slowing traffic may result in less crashes, which is a good thing. And they are just kind of like felt that they could navigate in any of these scenarios just fine. Same with the sheriff. But yes, we have talked to them, and that was kind of some of the general feedback we got. So,
thank you.
Mr. Russell.
Thank you. I would agree with my colleagues that the evaluation matrix is a really great tool, but I think that as the mayor kind of mentioned, that with all the different users that we have, each one I think is going to place a different weighting on each of the categories. So if I am a trucking company, the connectivity is probably going to have a higher weighting for me. So I think we want to make sure that we take those things into consideration. So I do hope that we hear from lots of users of this area to get the best possible choices for our solution. I do have 2 questions. One that kind of sticks out on the connectivity section. It says that the travel times on the slow and flow are really slow. Does it really mean 25 minutes? And as opposed to 5 minutes on the other options?
do you want to answer that? Or? Okay. So what this is the worst case in 2050 in the evening rush hour, okay? So even in 2050 with the slow flow, it works during the AM rush, the midday, basically all for about 2 hours of the day where there could be some backups in 2050. But the slow flow going down to one lane in each one lane works up until potentially that 2050, and then there could be some backups. Those backups could be maybe up to 3 blocks for an hour or 2, based upon the model growth, which is 25 years out and has a lot of, assumptions in it. So we wanted to show the worst case, and a lot of that is really happening at that transition, going from basically 2 lanes to 1. You just starts to bottleneck in those very far out years in the PM evening peak.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yes, go ahead.
I'd like to just add one thing to that point. It also doesn't take into, it's a model, so it takes into a lot of assumptions. It does not take into account resulting human behavior, because it can't. So one of the resulting human behaviors that probably would happen if travel times were 25 minutes is people would decide, you know what, I no longer want to drive through this area, I want to live here. You know, so, and that's actually a behavior that we want. So we don't design for the congestion in order to get that outcome, but so the model it can give us some information, but it just can't model us all the resulting human behaviors. So,
Thanks for that clarification. I had one last question that's kind of related to safety. Does the change from 2-lane to 1-lane on the same street add confusion or conflict points for the traveling public? And is that kind of built into that particular scenario?
Are you talking about when we would go from 1-way to 2-way and what that would look like in that last scenario? So I actually have a picture of that here. So it does result in more turns, right? So I believe we show that safety improves some with this alternative because you would be going in the 2-way portion, you would get some of that safety benefit. But yes, anytime you have more turns, you have more chance for potential conflict. Now, if you are on Central already and you're in the 2-way piece north of 13th, you would just continue south on Central. You would only, and if you're on White, you would just continue north on White. You're already going north. And so there's potential if somebody is on White and they really want to go north on Central, they might get over on 13th now instead of waiting until further up, but they also could continue further up as well. And so I know we talked a lot about the model, but the model really showed us that a lot of people really just want to be on Central. If they could go 2-way on Central, that is where they want to be because that's where the things are that they want to go to. So people are on White today because they have to be on White because that's your only way to travel northbound. So we do. If you were to make both these streets 2-way, you would see more usage on Central than you would on White. That's just where people want to go. Maybe that'll change over time as things redevelop, but given just everything that's on Central, that's just that's what the model's showing. So,
thank you.
Yep.
Just one additional question, and Ms. Roussel's through travel time question made me think of it. The ECIA smart parking DMATs that we're working through, in which we're talking about routing traffic and adjusting traffic based on speeds and automatic lights and how that will adapt our city and hopefully speed traffic through and offer people at certain very busy times, hey, if you take this route, you're going to be 5 minutes shorter than if you take this route. And although it's not fully implemented yet, did you take that study and that program into consideration when you were working on through travel times?
Yeah, I've actually been talking to kind of our technology team at Bolton and Mink, and not for the through travel times, but I mentioned kind of maybe some of this imbalance. So let's just take this situation here, and maybe we would say to people on White, instead of turning and going north on Central, stay on White and you'll save 2 minutes to go up and get to where you go, or whatever. You could have a sign here that could really help to maybe spread some of that demand out and better utilize both White and Central more evenly. But we do think that that technology piece is a key piece of that, especially for the trucks, right? Maybe to make sure that they can kind of get that information. There's technology that can sense a truck and give it a special message, so maybe there's key points where we have these changes, right? We would want to make sure that trucks are getting in the right lane, the correct lane to do the movement they want. So yes, technology will definitely be a layer in our recommendations and building upon the great work that the streets plan and everything is doing already. So, yep.
Thanks.
Mr. Jones, anything else?
Good, thank you.
Mr. Resnick, do you have anything further?
Yes, a question first, and that is, during public input, will the citizens have access to the evaluation matrix results?
Yes.
Okay, great. So that's a good tool for them. And just comment on some of the comments. And I think these infrastructure changes will have long-lasting effects on our citizens. And as Mr. Van Milligan likes to say, a city is forever. So let's do this right. Let's take the time and do the right thing. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mike, do you have anything further from a staff perspective? All right. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for a great discussion. Jennifer and Andrew, thank you very much for all your work on this and for bringing this before us. Really looking forward to the next month of larger community discussion on this one.
All right.
So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, there being no further business in this work session, we are adjourned.